With less than 1 month until the first Democratic presidential debate of 2020, a new controversy. The DNC now making it harder for the 23 Democratic candidates to qualify for the second round of debates, doubling the standards. The new rules would require candidates to earn 2% support in 4 DNC-approved polls over the summer, plus obtain contributions from at least 130,000 donors, including at least 400 from 20 different states. The higher standards could significantly narrow the crowded field. And one of those candidates unhappy with the DNC's decision joins us now, former Maryland Congressman and 2020 contender John Delaney. Good morning to you, John. Appreciate you coming on the program tonight.
It's great to be with you.
All right, so why do you take issue with these requirements?
Well, I'd just like to know how they came up with them, right? I mean, I understand the goal of the DNC, which is to narrow the field. And I don't actually have an issue with that. I understand why they're doing that. That makes sense. But these criteria that they've come up with, to me, seems somewhat arbitrary. I mean, the polling standard makes total sense. But then they have this donor criteria, and I just don't understand where that came from or what the thinking is behind that. And I don't actually think it's a good idea because, as best I can tell, as someone who's campaigned all over this country, a lot of Americans are struggling. About 50% of the American people can't afford basic necessities like their housing or their utilities or their food. And, you know, so if you look at the percentage of the American people that actually give money to political candidates, it's actually a pretty small percentage.
Well, and you're a unique player in that, right? Because your campaign's self-funded.
Well, it's not entirely self-funded, but I just don't understand why the DNC has created this kind of money standard or this donor standard as a way of qualifying for the debates. It doesn't seem to represent anything other than who runs the most Facebook ads to raise money online. You know, I think a polling standard makes total sense.
It sounds like you've come up with some sort of theory as to why they've increased these requirements. Is that the case?
No, I wish I did, right? That's why I actually sent a letter to Chairman Perez, who, by the way, I have a lot of respect for, and I think has been a great public servant. But I just, you know, I'm just curious as to who's putting these ideas in their head that this is actually the right way to create a filter. Because really what the DNC is doing is they're acting like a gatekeeper. And they're basically deciding who gets into these debates or who doesn't. And I just think they've created a filter which is based on these number of donors, and they've given these donors basically the power to open and shut.
So you're suggesting that would favor, obviously, certain candidates. And I ask you that because the Washington Times has put out this piece as Bernie Sanders supporters are apparently fearful that the DNC is now backing Biden like they did Hillary Clinton. There's only one Bernie Sanders supporter that is quoted in the piece that I can tell. This person founded Occupy DNC. And she makes the case that the mainstream media and the DNC are colluding against the American people. That's what it feels like. It's the same thing all over again. Just wanted to get your reaction to that as we continue this conversation about the requirements for the debate.
Listen, I don't think they're doing that. But what I do think they're doing is putting forth some arbitrary rules about who gets into the next round of debates. That doesn't seem to me to serve the interest of democracy or the American people. I have no issue with them trying to narrow the field. That makes sense. Historically, that's been done by polling averages. That also makes sense. I just think this donor kind of money standard, first of all, isn't who we are as a party. I mean, I'm running for president to improve people's lives, including so many Americans who are struggling. Most of these Americans can't give money to political candidates. So I don't know why their voice is not relevant.
Well, Republicans are going to make the case that the economy is thriving, John. So
right, but listen, we all know that 50% of the American people can't afford $500, and 40% of the American people can't afford their basic necessities like rent and utilities and food. Listen, I'm happy that the unemployment numbers are low. I'm happy that the economy is showing good momentum. But I think we can all agree that many Americans are still left behind. And I just feel like this standard that the DNC has put forth doesn't give them a voice because they're not kind of writing checks to the Democratic Party.
And you want to make your case so you can move up in what is a very crowded field. We will see. You haven't heard back from the DNC yet since you wrote your letter, right?
We haven't.
All right. Let us know when you do.
Now for today's campaign trail mix, Senator Bernie Sanders making the rounds in New Hampshire. He's holding a town hall right now in Concord. He's got another town hall later in Londonderry and a rally tonight in Manchester. While Senator Michael Bennet also in New Hampshire making several stops on a 2-day swing across the Granite State. Now this marks his second trip to New Hampshire since launching his campaign for president. And Pete Buttigieg is making a new pitch to big money donors. Politico reports he's offering special access to supporters who pledged to raise $250,000 during the primary. His campaign is promising exclusive briefings with the candidate and monthly sessions with senior staff. And now Joe Biden is setting his sights on the Golden State, looking for donors to fill his campaign war chest. Biden's backers are setting up a series of fundraising events starting in late June, including stops in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Meanwhile, Biden could be facing an energy crisis. He's the front-running Democrat by every measure, with broad support from key political players in early primary states. But when it comes to enthusiasm, where are the crowds? The head of She the People telling Politico, inspiration is the X factor, and we're waiting for the inspiration from Biden. When the inspiration isn't there, the turnout from the core of the Democratic base, women of color, isn't there. And then we lose. Joining me now is Jason Chaffetz, former chairman of the House Oversight Committee and a Fox News contributor, and of course, Juan Williams, Fox News political analyst, and my co-host on The Five. Tell me a little bit about this, because when Biden came on the scene, Juan, his numbers immediately went up. They've not really come down, just like 3% or something, something sort of reasonable. And yet he doesn't have that many crowds. He's not even doing that many events compared to others. Beto O'Rourke had 40 events this past 4 weeks. Warren and Booker both at 27. Biden just at 11. But it seems to keep his poll numbers up. He doesn't need to do more. But is there a problem that people don't seem to really get out there and join the rally and the crowds?
Well, I think there are two things to look at. One is the poll numbers indicate that his support does not come from the far left of the Democratic Party, and it doesn't come from young people. It really comes from people who are older, in fact, more conservative Democrats, Dana. And what you see there is people who, of course, are making the judgment that he is the most electable, which is a controversial phrase right now among Democrats as to what it means and what it implies. But nonetheless, that's the reason people say they like Joe Biden, why his numbers are so substantial. How that translates into crowds is, I don't think that's the crowd that shows up for rallies. I don't think these are people who get fired up, oh, I'm going to go see Joe Biden, especially right now. We're early in the process. We haven't had the first debate. A lot of people won't tune in till later, at which point, really, you're going to be seeing people responding to the Democratic banner flying more so than to Biden himself.
But then you contrast that with a Trump rally, right, in Pennsylvania, and then there's excitement and energy, and there's so many people, and everyone's got their MAGA hats on, and does the contrast cause a problem for Biden going forward?
Yeah, I do. I've never met the person who said, oh, I can't wait to see Joe Biden give a speech. I mean, that's never, ever happened. He was first elected in 1972. I was 5 years old at the time. He doesn't bring anything new to the table. Contrasting, you're right, with Donald Trump. When they were this far out in the election last time, Donald Trump could show up in a town, send out a tweet, and there'd be 20, 30,000 people.
But do you think that in a way,
there?
Juan, because there's 24 candidates, that people are just sort of waiting and that the enthusiasm will come later?
Oh, yeah, as I said, but I don't think it necessarily will come to Biden, just
Okay.
picking up on what the congressman said. I think it'll come to the Democratic Party banner and the idea of opposition to Trump. But I think that, to my mind, when people look right now, I don't think they're disappointed. I think they see the Trump rallies almost as like World Wrestling Federation events. It's a sensation. If Trump comes to town,
But that
oh
is
my
energy,
gosh.
right? And not only that, Juan, but they're gathering people's names, numbers, contact information to turn out to
important.
vote.
That's the process, and that's how you go about it. And I think they are doing a better job in the Trump camp this time of those items. But it does not mean that Biden's at a disadvantage in that regard. I think the Democrats, and again, this is evident in the numbers, are rallying around Joe
So
Biden.
I mentioned that Bernie Sanders is in New Hampshire today. He's doing some town halls up there. Now, Elizabeth Warren, actually his competition, she's down there, but she is the competition. She was an Iowa voter was talking about Elizabeth Warren, and she said this. She was totally comfortable talking about any topic that anyone brought up, and you can tell she loves it. I feel like any of these topics she could have spent another 2 hours on. That's very persuasive to me. Do you think she's having a second wind?
Look, if you're on the socialist side of the political spectrum, I think you really like Elizabeth Warren. I give her a lot of credit for the fact that she is policy-centric. She can talk about policy in depth, and I disagree with just about everything she says. But for that section of the party that actually wants to hear ideas in the socialist movement move forward, then Elizabeth Warren is very compelling.
Do you think that is calling her a socialist, does that fit the Elizabeth Warren model?
No, it's unfair, but I think that's what Republicans, especially Trump Republicans, are doing at the moment, is they're labeling all the Democrats as socialists. I mean, clearly what Elizabeth Warren is famous for is things like the Consumer Financial Protection Board.
Yeah.
That's not socialist. That's protecting people against the excesses of corruption.
The thing is, though, take a look at this poll, Juan. This is a Fox News poll. How important is policy? This is asking Democratic voters. It's like way down there at 47%. The number one thing is what you mentioned is electability. Can this person beat Trump? So as Elizabeth Warren, do you think that she can gain from where she is, way down in the around 13%?
Yeah, because what we've seen, especially in the last Fox poll, is she had like a 5-point jump in terms of percentages. She was actually making progress.
So who's she taking that from?
She takes it a little bit out of Sanders that you were just talking about. And I think that's why she's in New Hampshire. I think you're going to see more and more of a clash there, political clash for that niche in terms of the Democratic base.
What do you think that it's like on the Senate side right now when you have so many senators on the Democratic side all running for president?
I think when they show up at the Senate chambers, they're pretty much empty because the Democratic side of the aisle is all out there campaigning. I mean, it really is a bit of a distraction in order to move an agenda forward. But I got to tell you, you got Cory Booker in there too. You got a lot of Kamala Harris,
Kirsten Gillibrand.
Yes, I mean, you just go right down the list, and probably better to just figure out who's not on that list than who is on.
So the debates are a little less than a month from now, the first debate on the Democratic side. Do you think Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders will try to go after each other, or will they have an alliance and go after Biden?
Oh, no, my bet is they go after each other. I think you have to distinguish yourself in such a large field. I mean, clearly that's what happened with President Trump in 2016 and the Republican field, which, by the way, had a lot of senators. And he did that by really being himself. He dismissed the rest of them with the nicknames and the rest. He was just
But
Trump.
to that point, though, Jason, the Senate thing didn't work for the Republicans.
Donald Trump was the only one on the stage that didn't have the Washington, D.C. resume, and that was much more compelling. That's why I think actually Mayor Buttigieg actually has more of the advantage there than these long-time, I've been there for 45-year type of resumes.
He had a weird video today where he was like running and running and running. It's like 2 minutes long. I didn't have time to show it, but if you
That's better
Google
than getting teeth cleaned and the other videos we've seen.
It is true, getting your hair